Welcome back, listeners. So, Josh, before we move to the corn side of things, I just as a quick wrap up on the soybean side of things, as we made the rounds this harvest, those four factors we talked about, so early planting, fungicide, seed treatment, and annual spread on the fertilizer things are really those factors that made a big difference in terms of yield and where we sat. So factors driving soybeans, those are the things to hone in on. But we're going to shift focus here to just corn and how things have landed on that side of things as we wrap up harvest here.
Yeah, you almost got to go back and think back to this spring. It was a very different year than what we've had in say the previous 3 or 4. The planting dates window really shifted early. When we do look at the 57 locations that replicated plots that we planted in Southeast Minnesota, Allie, of those 57, they got all the way through harvest with no damage. All but 4 of them were planted by April 27th, which is kind of hard to believe. I know the 27 that you and I planted, they were all planted in April. We didn't have any shift into May. I don't know if that'll ever happen again. I hope it does because it sure was nice. But when we do look at just planting date, we talk a lot about the importance of planting date on soybeans. It's equally as important as corn. However, in this given year where it was all planted so early, it was kind of a flat curve. And you'll notice that in the book. However, if you do look at 2014, 15, 17, 18, 19, where you compile that data, we still usually see a 10 to 15 bushel advantage in the first window versus the finish window. It's just this year there was kind of just a start window. There really wasn't ever a finish window. It all happened in about a week's time, which is pretty cool. But so I was kind of just looking at planting date. And I also think, when we look at the corn set in general, we did break our record. I think our previous record in the corn set, we had to go all the way back to 2017 at 237.1. This year we came at 241.8. Pretty impressive number despite, a growing season has challenges, Allie, especially with some variable moisture across the area.
Yeah, and I was just going to go back to the planting date. I think, I go back to this spring, we joked about having to split up the planting date by the hour. And so it wasn't maybe a surprise that we didn't see a significant spread there. But yeah, that average this year sitting maybe a tick above last year. And I think it's important to note that maybe not everyone experienced the same environment this year. We know they didn't. Weather was variable across the area. So, depending on where you maybe fell under some of those rain clouds, you could be falling above, right on, or below that average. So just something to keep in mind. I think another thing that was really important this year, if we maybe just look at of our replicated PKP sets, that split between corn on corn and then the corn on soybean side of things, there was about a 6 bushel spread in our data. But again, if you look at full field average differences, likely that number that you experienced probably is a lot more variable than the 6 bushel spread that we see on our PKP plot side of things. Is that a fair statement, Josh?
Oh, yeah, I think so. And even when you do look at, for example, we sort out, what did the top 19 locations yield? They averaged 260. The bottom 19 locations averaged 222. So there still is a big spread in that data. There were some locations that far exceeded that average, some that were well below that average. And there's many agronomic and other reasons why there were some variations in there. And that's maybe something we'll dig into a little bit more in some episodes as we roll into the off-season, Allie. But I think it's important to note that, yields were very variable as you made the rounds, but there were some common denominators of what some factors really drove yield. And I will maybe summarize those a little bit here before the end of the day. Every year, Allie, too, we do talk about, we do look at our locations that were treated with fungicide compared to those that weren't treated with fungicide. The one thing about this data we always stress is this isn't side-by-side data. For example, let's just say plot A was planted in Canton, Minnesota. Plant B was planted in Grand Meadow, Minnesota. Canton had fungicide, Grand Meadow didn't. That's kind of the comparison we're looking at here, just so that that makes sense. It was interesting. The last 3 years or so, I think we've had like almost an exact 14 or 15 bushel response. Kind of eerie how consistent that was. This year that changed, Allie. Locations that were treated with fungicide, there was 26 treated compared to 31 not treated. The 26 that were treated had an advantage of 8.7 bushel. Allie, not sure about your thoughts, but I also kind of think that the lack of moisture we had down the stretch also probably limited some disease pressure across the area.
Yeah, initially when you look at that number being lower than past years, that's probably the first obvious reasoning that comes into my mind, just looking at the the dry weather and how that suppressed any disease that we did have in the canopy coming in to that tassel time period. So I think that's a big focus of it as well. But I also do think if you look at just the general benefits of having that fungicide application having been made on the corn crop, I think as we hit that heavy stress period when we were really dry, I do think that's when you saw a significant difference between those fields that had been treated with a fungicide and those that did not receive a fungicide application. So I do still feel there was a huge benefit that there, though our data, obviously the number being a little lower than last year.
Yep. And that's why I always try to call it that data. In my opinion, growers that split a farm or did fungicide likely saw maybe better results than what we saw in just our comparison in PKP. But I think the general trend is that there's still a lot of value to look at that fungicide application. Allie, the segment's running out of time in a fast hurry. I did want to talk a little bit more around, maybe some of the corn on corn and crop nutrition things we're into, but I think we'll maybe shelf that for next week. So a little intrigue of what we'll be talking about maybe here next week. But that'll be a wrap for this week, and be sure to tune in next week and we'll dig in some more insights.
You've been listening to Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060. If you've missed part of the show or want to hear more, check out the show page at kfilradio.com or with the 103.1 KFIL app. Stay connected with Allie and Josh on Twitter. It's at Allie GYs, WISE, and at Josh Schaffner to submit your questions for the show. Tune in next Wednesday for the next Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060.